Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this kind of content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Charlotte Whitmore had once been known as the gentle elementary school teacher who taught second grade with a heart full of warmth and a jar of peppermints on her desk. The kind of woman who remembered birthdays and knitted scarves for the PTA raffle. So when she ran for president of the Silver Ridge Homeowners Association, no one questioned her intentions. She won in a landslide. Finally, someone who cares about the neighborhood, they said. But that was 5 years ago, and the Charlotte of today was unrecognizable. Now, she patrolled the streets of Silver Ridge in her pearl-white Lexus at 6:30 every morning, pink clipboard in hand, snapping photos of any home whose blinds weren't uniform or whose grass grew a fraction past regulation height. She had written over 300 citations in the past year alone. Some said she had a spreadsheet to track who watered their plants too late at night. For Benjamin Carter, a retired civil engineer who moved to Silver Ridge for its promise of peace, the trouble began with a bright yellow envelope slapped onto his front door. Violation notice. Vehicle parked for over 48 hours. Fine. $600. He blinked at it, then looked at his Ford F-150, parked in his own driveway. It had been there since Tuesday, sure, he hadn't needed to run into town. But now he stared at the ticket in disbelief. His wife, Marlene, read the notice and shook her head. Is this what we pay HOA fees for? To be told where to park our own truck? Ben didn't respond. He stared at the laminated card Charlotte had left on the windshield, her signature neatly printed below a passive-aggressive note. Consistency keeps property values strong. He thought about ignoring it. But then came the second notice and the third, for things like a bird feeder being too colorful, and a neighbor's grandkids drawing chalk on the sidewalk. Ben decided to attend the next HOA meeting. The community center was packed. Charlotte stood at the podium like a queen addressing her court, her blouse crisp and her hair tightly pinned. Order, she chirped, tapping a tiny silver gavel. Tonight we will discuss the newly proposed Garden Color Coordination Act. Ben raised his hand. Excuse me, but who decides what colors are allowed in someone's garden? Charlotte smiled without warmth. The board, of course. Bright hues can be disruptive to the aesthetic harmony of Silver Ridge. You mean flowers? Laughter rippled through the back row. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. Mr. Carter, if you find Silver Ridge's policies so troubling, perhaps you should consider relocating. That night, Benjamin sat alone in his study, staring out over the rows of perfectly trimmed lawns and beige-painted houses. He opened his laptop and pulled up the county assessor's website. He searched property after property. Then he opened the drawer where he kept his late father's journal. His father had lost their family home to an HOA dispute 20 years ago, forced to sell at a loss after years of mounting fines. They wear you down, the old man had said, until you give up. But Benjamin wasn't ready to give up. Not this time. He picked up the phone and called his old college friend, now a real estate attorney. I want to talk about setting up an investment entity, he said. I want to start buying property. Quietly. What kind of property? Every house that goes up for sale in Silver Ridge. It began slowly. He created 3 LLCs with names that sounded like distant investors. Pine Hollow Holdings, Meadowcrest Estates, Solstice Group. Whenever a house went up for sale, he made a competitive cash offer. No fanfare, no bidding wars, just a check and a handshake. Within 3 years, he owned 31% of the neighborhood. By year 5, it was 67%. All while Charlotte kept fining people for mismatched doormats and holiday wreaths hung too early. He had been documenting everything. Photos of Charlotte measuring mailbox heights at midnight, video footage of her snapping pictures of teenagers' cars, records of her funneling HOA funds into a consulting firm run by her nephew. Then came the final straw. Mrs. Gonzalez, a widow who'd lived in Silver Ridge for 18 years, received a $1,000 fine for excessive wind chimes. She cried on Ben's porch. That woman treats us like criminals, she whispered. And we just take it. Not anymore, Ben replied. He called an emergency HOA meeting. This time, he didn't sit in the back. When Charlotte strode in with her clipboard, she found Benjamin already at the podium. "What is this?" she snapped. "A change," he replied. "According to HOA bylaws, a majority property owner has the right to call a leadership vote. I now own 67% of Silver Ridge. Tonight we're voting on a new board." Gasps rippled through the room. Charlotte's hand shook as she reached for her gavel. "This is a hijacking. This is democracy." He passed out documents. Photos, financial records, testimonials from residents. Evidence of abuse, embezzlement, and manipulation. People who had never spoken at meetings rose to their feet. "She fined me for drying clothes on a line. She said my son's wheelchair ramp was a visual disruption." When the vote was cast, Charlotte lost 91-3. She didn't stay to clean out her office. In the weeks that followed, Benjamin led the charge to dissolve the old HOA structure and create a resident council. Fines were dropped. Restrictions were revised. Lawns sprouted wildflowers. A community garden replaced the site of Charlotte's former compliance office. And the Ford F-150? Still parked in his driveway, now with a sticker that read, "This truck helped save Silver Ridge." As Benjamin watched the sunrise over the neighborhood he had reclaimed, he thought of his father. "They wear you down or you stand back up," he whispered. And in Silver Ridge, people were finally standing up. Dead silence and Charlotte's strange inspection parade. Every Sunday morning, Charlotte Whitmore took her usual stroll. Not to walk her dog or get some fresh air like other seniors. No. She carried her signature pastel pink clipboard and a retractable steel measuring tape, patrolling the neighborhood like a wartime drill sergeant. Benjamin watched her from behind his curtain, a warm cup of tea in hand. He knew the routine. Charlotte would crouch to measure each blade of grass, scribble notes in her log, then snap photos of any violations. Mr. Darnell's old rocking chair had been ticketed for being aesthetic clutter. Mrs. Anderson got a warning for flying the Ohio state flag instead of the U.S. flag. No one dared fight back. The first to speak out, Karen Meyer, had been fined after her grandchild drew chalk art on the sidewalk. Days later, Charlotte had the water to her house shut off for emergency pipe maintenance. Everyone got the message. Cross Charlotte and you'd pay dearly. But Benjamin stayed quiet. Every night, beneath the dim streetlight outside his window, he sat in his office poring over maps, meeting notes, and invoices. He discovered suspicious billing from Silver Ridge Beautification LLC, which turned out to be owned by, surprise, Charlotte's niece. The day of reckoning, first showdown. The HOA meeting was held on a Tuesday evening, inside the tiny rec hall beside the chapel. Charlotte stood behind the podium, framed by the HOA flag that read, "Order Unity Progress," a slogan that sounded more fitting for a dystopian novel. "We will now vote on a new rule," Charlotte declared. "Any personal pickup truck, even if owned by the resident, parked for over 36 consecutive hours will be fined $500 per instance." Benjamin raised his head. His eyes, sharp as ever, locked onto hers. He stood slowly. The room fell dead silent. "Excuse me," he said, calm and steady. "Was this regulation made available to residents at least 14 days in advance, as required?" Charlotte stiffened. "As HOA president, I reserve the right to propose emergency rules when needed." Benjamin's lips curled into a slight smile. "I'm afraid not. Per Article 6.3 of the Silver Ridge HOA bylaws, all new regulations require advance notice and a draft for review." He pulled out a thick stack of documents from his leather case. "And per Section 7.1, any individual or group that holds more than 66% of residential property has the right to call for a vote to restructure the HOA board." Charlotte froze. The crowd murmured. Benjamin stepped forward, placing a list of properties onto the table. "Through Oak Valley Investments, Sunset Holdings, and Meadowline Partners, I now own 69% of Silver Ridge." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Charlotte's face went ghost white. "I'm not here to declare war," Benjamin said. "I'm here to return this community's voice. The one you've silenced for far too long. The room erupts. Sarah Levine, fined for leaving up her Christmas lights too long, stood up, teary-eyed. I support Mr. Carter. You're the only one who's cared about fairness, croaked Mr. Darnell. An elderly woman rose next. They made me rip out my vegetable garden because it didn't match the landscaping theme. But now I see what's truly unappealing is the fear. The meeting turned into a quiet revolution. Charlotte backed away, her heels clicking across the tile. No one stood in her way. No one said goodbye. Benjamin remained behind until the hall was empty, holding the final paper in his hand. Board restructure vote. Results. 87 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstention. He looked up at the ceiling. 6 years. 6 years of patience, preparation, and silent resistance. This wasn't revenge, he thought. It was the return of justice. The HOA meeting and the legal coup. Charlotte Whitmore had called an emergency HOA meeting at the Silver Ridge Community Center, planning to pass a new regulation limiting each household to just 1 vehicle in their own driveway. But before the vote could begin, Benjamin calmly stood up. Residents turned, surprised, as he walked to the front of the room holding a thick folder in his hands. I apologize for the interruption, Benjamin began, his voice calm and even. But I believe there's something this community deserves to know before any new rule is passed. He opened the folder and projected a detailed property ownership map onto the screen. Gasps echoed across the room as he revealed legal documents proving that, through a series of companies like Oak Valley Investments and Sunset Holdings, he now owns 69% of the properties in Silver Ridge. As the majority stakeholder, he declared, I have the legal authority to call for a vote of no confidence and dissolve the current HOA board, effective immediately. Charlotte's face turned pale, but Benjamin wasn't finished. He clicked to the next slide, surveillance footage from his security cameras showing Charlotte sneaking around neighbors' homes at 3 a.m., flashlight in hand, measuring lawn height and taking photos of porches. Then came the financial records. $146,000 from the HOA's budget had been transferred to Whitmore Landscape Solutions, a company owned by Charlotte's nephew. That money was supposed to be used for community repairs, Benjamin said, his voice now sharp. Instead, it was funneled into shady contracts that directly benefited her family. The room erupted in outrage. Long silent homeowners stood up and began shouting. She fined me $300 for a wind chime. My holiday lights were on 1 extra day. I got a violation. She threatened to sue me for leaving a garden hose out overnight. Charlotte tried to compose herself. This is slander. I've spent years improving this neighborhood. Benjamin raised his hand for silence. This isn't revenge, he said. This is restoration. Starting tonight, the residents of Silver Ridge will vote to elect a new board, fair, transparent, and accountable. No more hidden fees. No more 3 a.m. patrols. No more tyranny disguised as neighborhood standards. He turned to face the crowd. All in favor of dissolving the current HOA board? Almost every hand in the room shot up. Charlotte stood frozen, her gavel slipping from her hand and hitting the floor. For the first time, she realized her power had vanished. Not with a bang, but through the collective will of the very people she had tried to control. And just like that, the reign of Charlotte Whitmore came to an end. After the trial and the journey to heal a community, the court had spoken, but the scars from Charlotte Whitmore's years of authoritarian rule over Silver Ridge hadn't faded. Benjamin Carter, once a retired civil engineer just trying to live in peace, returned not in a blaze of glory, but with quiet resolve. He went back to his modest home under the tree-lined streets, the same home where he'd once been fined for leaving his truck parked for over 48 hours, and got to work on what he considered his real mission, rebuilding trust. 3 days after the trial, Benjamin hosted a casual neighborhood gathering in his backyard. No flashy banners, no big speeches, just folding chairs, pitchers of lemonade, and a crowd of wary faces unsure of what would come next. I'm not here to be anyone's leader, Benjamin began, his voice low and steady. I'm just an old man who got tired of seeing good people pushed around. But if we work together with kindness and transparency, we can make Silver Ridge better than it's ever been. He proposed a temporary resident advisory council, not a traditional HOA with rigid rules, but a community-run board with equal representation. Each subsection of the neighborhood would elect one representative, and all decisions would be made openly with public votes. Sarah McAllister, who was once fined for letting her grandkids draw chalk on the sidewalk, became the first council member. Mr. Martinez, a retired veteran at the end of the block, volunteered to lead a team helping elderly residents with home maintenance. Even 14-year-old Lucas from house number 84 stepped up to design a revamped playground that would include an art wall, a chess corner, and a children's garden. Silver Ridge started changing, not with noise, but with heart. The no parking over 24 hours signs came down. The violation boxes disappeared, replaced by a community board filled with announcements for weekend markets, gardening workshops, and story time for kids. Benjamin began taking morning walks again, no longer met with cold stares or whispered complaints, but with waves, smiles, and friendly chats on front porches. One afternoon, while watering the community garden, planted on the same patch of lawn where Charlotte once stalked residents, Benjamin and Lucas were approached by a news crew. They want to feature Silver Ridge in a segment about how a neighborhood healed after years of HOA abuse, the reporter said. Benjamin gave a humble smile. I didn't heal anything, he replied. The people did that. They just needed the space to breathe again. Charlotte, and the price of control. Meanwhile, 40 miles away in a quiet apartment complex with no HOA, Charlotte Whitmore lived in anonymity. No power, no board meetings, no clipboard in hand. By court order, Charlotte was barred from serving on any residential board for 10 years. But worse than the ban was the silence. Neighbors who once praised her now avoided eye contact. Her old community service awards gathered dust in a display case nobody looked at anymore. One morning, Charlotte received an envelope from Silver Ridge. Inside was a photo of the blooming community garden, full of smiling families, kids playing, and vegetables ready for harvest. Below it was a handwritten note. Thank you for showing us what really matters. She stared at the photo, not sure if she felt anger or regret. Benjamin's final words. 1 year later, at the Silver Ridge Resident Council's anniversary celebration, Benjamin stood quietly before the crowd. Now older, a little grayer, and infinitely prouder. He looked around at the painted mailboxes, the string lights still glowing from last week's holiday, the porches no longer inspected for violations, and the neighbors, once silenced by fear, now laughing freely. We used to live under the shadow of rules, he said. Now we live in the light of community. He raised an old wooden gavel, not as a tool of power, but as a symbol of change. This used to represent authority, Benjamin said. Today I hand it over to you, as a reminder of responsibility. Guard it with kindness. Use it with fairness. And never forget who it really belongs to, the people. The crowd burst into applause. Some older residents wiped away tears. Men and women who once thought they'd spend their twilight years in quiet fear, now standing proudly as free neighbors in a place they finally felt at home. 3 months after the historic trial that ousted Charlotte Whitmore and dissolved the former HOA, Silver Ridge was no longer a name that sent a chill down residents' spines every time they checked their mailboxes. Instead, a new chapter was being written, not with fanfare, but through quiet, meaningful change led by the very people who once lived in fear of violations. Benjamin Carter, once dismissed as that old guy with the truck, had become the living symbol of perseverance and justice. But he never crowned himself president of the new board. Instead, he invited every resident to take part in creating the new Silver Ridge Community Alliance, a reimagined HOA built on democratic values where every voice held equal weight, and no one had unchecked authority. We don't need a queen measuring grass, Benjamin said at the first community meeting in the same hall that had once been Charlotte's fortress of control. We need a neighborhood where seniors can grow vegetables, kids can play ball, and no one's Christmas lights are being inspected at 3 a.m. And that's exactly what he built. For the first time in Silver Ridge history, the HOA budget was fully transparent. Every transaction, every line item was printed and pinned to the community bulletin board. Residents like Mrs. McLean, once fined for having non-matching curtains, now sat on the rule committee, suggesting reasonable and fair guidelines. "Don't fine someone for a flower pot," she said. "Just make sure walkways are clear." Kids were finally allowed to draw with sidewalk chalk. Every Saturday morning, they gathered at the new community park. Once the same lawn Charlotte used to patrol with a ruler. Now it had swings, benches, a shared vegetable garden, and a wooden sign that read, "Every laugh is worth protecting." Sarah Jenkins, who'd once been ordered to uproot her tomato plants because they weren't aesthetically pleasing, now managed the community garden. "I used to dread every knock at the door," she said, gently turning soil. "Now I grow for the whole block and teach school kids about organic farming." Mr. Harold, once threatened with legal action for leaving a hose on overnight, now volunteers to manage the new irrigation system, funded through savings from cutting executive salaries. There were no more secret patrols, no more hidden cameras, no more citations for having too large a vehicle. Each month, the community held open meetings where residents voted on everything, from fence paint colors to solar-powered streetlight upgrades. Silver Ridge, once a symbol of control and abuse under the guise of maintaining standards, was now living proof of something better, that when people are given back their voice, decency rises. A local journalist who visited the neighborhood later wrote on the front page, "Silver Ridge used to be known for fear. Now it stands for hope." As for Benjamin Carter, he didn't need a title. Each morning, he rode his bike around the neighborhood, stopping to chat with new residents, waving to kids playing soccer, and smiling as he passed the sign reading Hope Park, because he knew he hadn't just taken back a neighborhood. He'd helped people reclaim their right to live in peace, without fear, without control, without being fined for hanging a wind chime. The victory that echoed, and a lesson for the nation. Benjamin Carter's story wasn't just a local triumph. It became a powerful reminder of something many older Americans feel deeply, that once close, friendly neighborhoods are slowly being suffocated by increasingly rigid and power-hungry homeowners associations, HOAs. As the Silver Ridge saga spread across the media and was adapted into a nationally broadcast documentary, thousands of people across the country saw themselves in the faces and frustrations of the once silenced residents of Silver Ridge. In a society ruled by bureaucratic red tape and strict policies, Benjamin's story reminds us that justice doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes, it starts with one person standing up and saying, "Enough." Benjamin didn't shout. He didn't scheme. He planned, acted quietly, and waited for the right moment to shine a light on the truth. That's something older generations, those who lived through wars, hardship, and rebuilding, understand well. True strength comes not from rage, but from patience and resolve. Ironically, when the new neighborhood that Charlotte Whitmore moved into began experiencing similar power struggles, it was their own HOA board that reached out to Benjamin for advice. That moment was both poetic and deeply meaningful. It proved that no one is untouchable, and that a community is only as strong as the respect and voice it gives to every resident. Today, neighborhoods across the country are rethinking how they're governed. People are beginning to ask, are these rules really for the common good, or are they tools for control? Are HOAs protecting property value, or making life stressful and divisive? The story of Silver Ridge is inspiring people, especially older citizens who may feel left behind by technology or modern systems, to realize they still have the power to lead meaningful change. With their wisdom, calm presence, and love for the land they live on, they're not just reclaiming their rights, they're reigniting the spirit of community. And that's the greatest lesson from Silver Ridge. When ordinary people stand up, not to fight each other, but to stand together, even the most oppressive systems can't survive. Thank you for joining us on this journey. See you in the next story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible stories.